They abandoned a newborn in the snow to die. Then a soldier and his K9 heard him crying. The Mississippi ran black beneath a skin of ice, its slow current whispering under the crust as wind scraped needles of snow across the river trail. Nathan Cole walked there most nights, a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette wrapped in an old field jacket, his breath blooming white in the cold. Beside him, Bear trotted with a soldier's cadence, ears keen, paws silent, a German shepherd whose eyes found everything the darkness tried to hide. For 6 winters, Nathan had traced this path, trying to outpace the ache of a name he could never say aloud without breaking. Lily, 6 years gone, a drunk driver, a home hollowed by grief, a marriage that couldn't carry the weight. Bear stopped so abruptly the leash snapped taut. The dog's body went rigid, every muscle pointing toward the riverbank. Then he launched, a sudden bolt into the drifts, snow fanning off his shoulders. Nathan's voice caught on the first syllable of the command he'd taught in another life, the one with boots and sand and distant thunder. Bear didn't need it. He was already digging. At first, Nathan saw only a small blue bundle, half swallowed by the storm, the sort of thing winter spits out and forgets. Then the sound pierced him, thin and jagged, a newborn's cry, more rasp than voice, stubborn as a match struck in wind. Nathan dropped to his knees. His gloved hands swept snow aside, found fabric, found heat, barely there. The blanket fell open on a tiny face flushed raw by the cold, a mouth open in anger at the world and a need it refused to answer. Training overruled shock. Nathan shoved his scarf under his coat, unzipped, and pulled the infant against his chest. Sealing the child into the furnace of his skin, he tucked the blanket tight around the small body and cupped the head beneath his chin. Bear pressed close, a low whine vibrating through the dog's ribs, breath frosting the baby's cheek as if offering what warmth he had. Nathan stood, already moving, boots carving a frantic trail back toward the road, the hospital name beating in his skull in time with the child's stuttering cries. He didn't look back at the river or the dark trees or the place where someone had chosen winter to finish what despair had started. He only held on tighter, the old ache in his chest tearing open to make room for something fierce and new. Who had left a life to the mercy of ice? And what would Nathan and Bear find if they followed the storm back to its source? St. Paul in deep winter is a quiet kind of cathedral. Streetlights throw halos on the snowpack. Row houses stand shoulder to shoulder like parishioners, roofs bowed beneath white. The river divides the city into 2 reflections of the same cold resolve, and the bridges stitch them together with iron and grit. Nathan Cole fit here not because he belonged, but because winter understood what he carried. It did not ask questions. It simply held the weight. Before the Army, he had been a carpenter's apprentice, measuring cedar and fir, learning the patience of plumb lines. After the Army, he learned the patience of grief. Lily's bedroom door stayed closed at first, then ajar, then open to a stillness that sounded like a field after battle. Marissa lasted 2 winters before the house itself began to press on her chest. She left with a suitcase and a whisper of apology that couldn't compete with the silence. Nathan didn't blame her. People break in different directions. He broke inward. Bear arrived the spring after, a rescue with a record, discarded by one handler for being too intense, by another for being too stubborn. Nathan read the notes, met the dog, and recognized the truth behind the words. Intensity is just loyalty with nowhere to go. Stubbornness is survival, taught by a world that won't listen. He brought Bear home and learned the dog's language, the stillness before a choice, the angle of ears parsing air, the way those amber eyes followed pain like a compass. On the night, the storm delivered the blue blanket to the riverbank. Nathan moved the way training moves you when thought would only slow you down. By the time he shouldered through the sliding doors of Regent Medical, his jacket steamed in the overheated lobby and the nurses were already in motion. A receptionist pointed, a tech hustled forward with a warming bag, and Nathan found his voice long enough to say, "Newborn, hypothermia, found by the river, still breathing." Dr. Laura Whitman met them at the threshold of an exam bay. She was small and quick, a woman whose presence filled space the way competence always does. Her hair was pinned with the kind of care that survives long shifts, and her eyes held the practiced gentleness of someone who has told parents everything on the spectrum between miracles and endings. She took the bundle with a precision that felt like reverence. "We've got you," she said to the child, and then to Nathan without looking up. "Sir, stay nearby. We'll need details." Bear lay sphinx still on the tile just outside the curtain, the leash slack between his paws. Hospital smells made his nose twitch, bleach and plastic and the bright metal scent of fear. But he held his post. When the baby's cry quavered into a thin mewl, his ears tipped forward as if the sound drew a line only he could see from crib to heart. Sheriff Thomas Reed arrived on the pulse of flashing lights, a heavy coat flung open over his uniform, snow melting in his gray hair. He carried the weight of office like a shield, stubborn, squared, unyielding. In a small city, a foundling draws every spotlight at once. Reed's gaze took Nathan in from boots to brow, pausing on the old field jacket, the military canvas, the dog who did not startle at the radio crackle. "Walk me through it," he said, a pen already poised. Nathan told it straight, the trail, the bolt, the digging, the cry. Reed's questions cut like chisels. What time? How far down river? Any other footprints? Any vehicles? The sheriff's skepticism wasn't hostility. It was caution forged by years on scenes where coincidence hid intent. Still, something in the line of his mouth suggested a story he hadn't heard yet and wasn't sure he wanted to. Dr. Whitman reappeared with a nurse at her shoulder. "He's stable," she said, and the room's air seemed to expand. Mild hypothermia, dehydrated but responsive. No bruising or neglect markers. His umbilical stump was cleanly tied. Whoever left him cared for him up to the last minute. She met Reed's eyes, then Nathan's. This wasn't cruelty. It was desperation. The word changed the shape of the night. Desperation is a room people enter when every door before it has already closed. Nathan felt it like a remembered ache, the hour before dawn when you have run out of prayers and keep going anyway. He nodded once, more to the idea than to anyone present. A nurse with copper hair and a badge that read Hayes stepped forward. "We've started warm IV fluids. He needs a name for the chart." She smiled at the bundle under the warmer's glow. "We can use infant dough for now, but it's nice when their first hours aren't anonymous." Nathan swallowed. Names mattered. Names rooted you when the world tried to unmake you. "Ethan," he said, the syllables arriving without permission, soft as if borrowed. "Temporary, if it needs to be. Just Ethan." Dr. Whitman wrote it down without commentary. Reed did not. His pen paused. And you chose the name because it means firmness, Nathan said, surprising himself again. Steadfast. He sounded like he wanted to stay. Bear eased his chin onto the edge of Nathan's boot, and the warmth that rose under Nathan's ribs startled him. It wasn't the blaze of battle or the scald of grief. It was the small, steady heat of a coal refusing to go out. Procedures spun outward from the bay. Social services notified. A call to the neonatal unit for a warmer crib. Paperwork thudding onto clipboards. Reed stepped aside to take a dispatch report. Dr. Whitman slipped back behind the curtain with her nurse. Nathan stood in the corridor as if on a ridge line watching weather move, contained, waiting, listening. Hospitals are ecosystems of stories intersecting. As the minutes stretched, Nathan began to notice the people who had moved inside this one. A janitor who slow-walked his mop so the squeak wouldn't wake a sleeping toddler. A respiratory therapist who tucked a blanket around an elderly man's feet with the same care Laura used on Ethan's swaddling. The murmur of courage and exhaustion braided in the halls like a hymn. Sheriff Reed returned, attention narrowed. We'll want to check the riverbank with K9s at first light. His gaze flicked to Bear. Yours seems qualified. He's retired, Nathan said. Bear looked up at him as if to say he was nothing of the sort. Reed's mouth twitched. Retired K9s don't pull their handlers to newborns in blizzards. He considered Nathan a beat longer. You'll come with us. You saw the site. If there's a trail, he'll know it. Nathan nodded. He didn't add that neither of them would sleep anyway. When Dr. Whitman invited him to the warmer, Nathan hovered like a man at the threshold of a church he hadn't entered in years. The baby lay tulip small under the glow, fists uncurling and curling with soft, stubborn insistence. Nathan's shadow fell over the plexiglass. The child blinked, and for a second, the eyes seemed to widen toward the shape above as if memory existed already. Heat, voice, the cadence of a heart pressed against another. Hi, Ethan, Nathan whispered, feeling the name settle into him like a key turning. Bear leaned until his nose bumped the plastic, exhaled, and fogged a circle that cleared, fogged again, cleared, an animal's rhythm answering a human's. Dr. Whitman laid a hand on the warmer. He'll stay tonight. We'll keep him monitored. She angled her head at Nathan. Don't go far. I won't, he said, and surprised himself for the third time in an hour by how true it felt. Outside, the storm gathered itself for another pass along the river. Inside, winter loosened its grip a fraction on the man who had learned to hold still under it. Nathan sat on a hallway chair with Bear at his feet, the dog's flank warm against his boot, and let the hospital's dim hum fill the places where silence had lived too long. Somewhere out there, a choice had broken a heart to save a life. In here, that life breathed under borrowed light and a name that meant staying. Nathan didn't know yet whose hands had tied the cord cleanly, whose tears had fallen into the blanket's weave, what trail of love and loss would lead from a riverbank to a dying man and the papers he would sign. He only knew he had stepped onto that trail the moment Bear froze and listened harder than the wind. And once a soldier chooses a road, he walks it to the end. Morning broke in sharp light, the kind that made every icicle glisten like glass and every breath look like smoke. Nathan hadn't slept. He sat in the neonatal waiting area, boots planted wide, elbows on his knees. Bear dozed at his feet, head resting on his paws, but even in rest, his ears twitched at every sound from the ward. When Dr. Laura Whitman finally emerged, she carried not only the night's exhaustion in her face, but also something gentler. "He's stable," she said. "Feeding well, vitals strong. He'll need close monitoring, but for now, the danger is past." Nathan exhaled, only then realizing he had been holding his breath since the cry in the snow. Bear lifted his head, tail brushing the floor in a slow sweep. Laura's eyes softened. "He recognizes you. When you held him yesterday, his heart rate steadied faster than with anyone else. Babies know things we don't." The words lingered in Nathan's chest as he followed Sheriff Reed back to the riverbank. Snow had hardened overnight, preserving the footprints of a desperate journey. Bear's nose skimmed low, nostrils quivering. Without a command, he veered off the trail and began to pull toward a stand of pines. They found the remnants of a camp there, just enough for survival. A small fire pit under a hollowed tree, a bottle of formula crusted at the lip, a tangle of blankets still holding the faint scent of milk. Nathan crouched, fingertips brushing the frozen fabric. A smear of blood marred the snow nearby, already turning brown in the cold. Reed stood with his hands on his belt, scanning the scene. "She tried," he said quietly, surprising Nathan. Whoever the mother was, she tried. Bear nosed at the blankets, then whined, pawing the ground where a thin leather journal lay half buried. Nathan picked it up, the cover cracked, pages stiff with cold. The handwriting inside was shaky, words slipping between clarity and desperation. He read fragments aloud. "Sophia, fever worse. Grace gone. Can't keep him warm. Forgive me?" At the bottom of one page, "Ethan Parker." Nathan closed the book with hands that trembled. Bear pressed against his side, grounding him. "She left him here," Nathan said, voice low. "Not because she wanted to, because she had no other choice." The discovery didn't erase the ache in his chest, but it gave it shape. This wasn't abandonment. It was surrender, the kind of surrender only love makes when it runs out of strength. Back at the hospital, Nathan stood by the warmer again. The baby's fists fluttered against the swaddle, face red with effort of crying, until a nurse placed a bottle at his lips. Nathan leaned closer, watching the rhythm of sucking and the way the boy's eyelids drooped in drowsy relief. Bear sat beside him, ears angled forward, his nose pressed near the crib as though memorizing the scent that tied them now. Nathan reached a finger through the slot in the plastic. Small fingers, impossibly tiny, curled around it with surprising force. Heat surged up Nathan's arm into the cavity of his chest, a heat both tender and scalding. He hadn't realized how much he missed the weight of a child's trust until it returned in this fragile grip. For the first time in 6 years, Nathan felt tears sting his eyes without bitterness attached. He didn't pull away. He let them fall, silent streaks that blurred the hospital's sterile light into something softer. Bear gave a low whuff, almost approving, and laid his head against Nathan's boot. The connection was unspoken but undeniable. A cry in the snow had bound 3 lives together: a soldier with too many ghosts, a dog whose loyalty never wavered, and a newborn whose survival was already a miracle. Nathan whispered, his voice breaking but steady enough for the boy to hear, "You're not alone anymore, Ethan, not while I'm breathing." And for the first time in years, he believed himself. Snow fell again over St. Paul, not with the fury of a storm, but with the steady insistence of memory. Each flake seemed to settle with a whisper, a reminder of nights Nathan Cole had spent staring at ceilings he could not sleep beneath. In the quiet corners of Regent Medical, where the hum of machines carried more lullaby than silence, those memories came back unbidden. He sat at Ethan's bedside late into the night. Bear stretched long across the linoleum, tail twitching each time a nurse entered. The baby's breaths were soft and shallow, fragile as bird wings. Nathan found himself counting them, afraid of what the space between might mean. Every rise of the tiny chest sent him back years, to a hospital room painted pale yellow, to a little girl who had once clutched his finger in the same fierce way. Lily. 6 years hadn't softened the image. He still saw the way she used to dance in socks across the kitchen floor, how her laughter filled corners where light always seemed dimmer. He still saw the car crumpled on the side of the road, headlights blinking into nothing, smelled the burnt rubber, heard the drunk driver sobbing into a breathalyzer. He still heard himself screaming her name, though she had never answered. Marissa had folded under the weight. She tried at first, clinging to routines, packing lunches for a child no longer there, folding dresses that would never be worn. Nathan buried himself in silence, thinking endurance was the answer. But silence is a battlefield too, and Marissa wasn't built for trenches. She left with a single suitcase, eyes already emptied. Nathan didn't stop her. In truth, he hadn't known how to speak anymore. Bear had come after. A working dog cast off for biting at the wrong time, too headstrong for the handlers who wanted obedience without soul. The shelter notes described him as reactive. Nathan saw the word and thought of his own reflection. They met in a chain-link pen that stank of bleach. Bear didn't approach right away. He circled once, twice, then sat, amber eyes fixed on Nathan as though trying to read his scars. Nathan extended his hand. Minutes passed before Bear pressed his nose against it. From then on, they belonged to each other. Bear carried his own ghosts. He startled at the crack of dropped pans, bristled at men in uniforms too tight around the shoulders, and sometimes woke from sleep with a growl lodged in his throat. But he was steadfast. He walked beside Nathan through winters when conversation was impossible, stood guard when whiskey tempted, and pressed his head into Nathan's palm during nights when memories pressed too hard. If Nathan had survived those years, it was because Bear had insisted he was still here. Now there was Ethan, a fragile link in a chain of survival. Nathan felt the weight of it with every visit to the NICU, with every time his finger was grasped by those impossibly small hands. He tried not to imagine futures. Futures had been stolen before. Yet the resemblance to Lily was unbearable and undeniable. The softness in the cheeks, the stubborn clench of tiny fists. Nathan carried it like a wound he couldn't decide whether to open or protect. The tragedy wasn't his alone. The journal recovered from the camp told its own story, written in lines uneven with pain. He brought it back to the hospital, pages smoothed against the bed table as he tried to decipher them in the sterile light. Sophia, fever worsening, Grace gone in childbirth, James too weak to work, milk gone, cold worsening. If someone finds him, tell Ethan his parents loved him enough to let him live. The words carried weight. No soldier's hands could lift. Nathan understood them too well. The decision to surrender, not from lack of love, but because love demanded sacrifice. He closed the journal with a hand that shook and pressed it against his chest. Sheriff Reed remained skeptical, though perhaps less hard-edged now. He visited Nathan in the waiting room one evening, the lines on his face deepened by more than age. "We'll find out the truth," he said, lowering himself into the chair beside Nathan. "Mothers don't vanish. Fathers don't leave infants in the snow without reason. If this was desperation, we'll prove it. If it was crime, we'll uncover it." Nathan nodded, though words didn't come. Reed studied him, then glanced at Bear. "Funny thing," he murmured. "Men and dogs. Both of you look like you've been carrying battles too long." Nathan didn't answer, but Bear lifted his head and gave a soft huff, as if to remind them both that battles fought together aren't lost so easily. That night, Nathan dreamed. Lily's laughter echoed across a snowy field, blending with the cries of a baby he couldn't reach. Bear ran ahead, always just at the edge of sight. He woke drenched in sweat, the hospital chair stiff beneath him, Ethan steady breathing, the only proof the dream hadn't swallowed them whole. The next morning, Nathan returned to the river with Bear. They followed the trail deeper this time, into the woods where silence pooled thick. Bear found the cabin before Nathan saw it, a leaning shack, smoke long dead in the chimney. Inside lay James Parker, gaunt, skin stretched thin over bone, coughing blood into a rag. His eyes lifted weakly as Nathan entered, and in them Nathan saw not surprise, but relief. "You found him," James rasped, voice splintered by disease. "Ethan, my boy." Nathan nodded, throat tight. "He's safe, at the hospital. He's alive." Tears carved paths through the grime on James's cheeks. He fumbled at the table beside him, pulling forward a packet of papers. Adoption forms, blank lines where parents' names should go. "Tell him we loved him," James whispered. "Tell him we wanted more, but I can't." His breath fractured into a cough that seemed to tear him apart. Nathan gripped his hand, firm as a soldier promising cover fire. "I'll tell him," he swore. "I'll make sure he knows." James nodded once, the ghost of peace crossing his face, before the rattle in his lungs stole the rest of his words. Outside, Bear sat at the threshold, ears pricked against the silence that followed. Nathan stepped into the cold, carrying both the journal and the papers, his promise heavier than any weapon he'd ever borne. In the hospital later, when he held Ethan again, the child's tiny fingers closed over the edge of his dog tags. Nathan looked into that fragile face and felt the weight of two tragedies, his own past and the boy's inheritance, woven into one fragile, unbreakable thread. This was no accident of chance. It was the collision of wounds, of battles fought and lost, converging into the possibility of healing. Nathan didn't yet know how to raise a child again, how to survive the ghosts that still woke him screaming. But as Ethan's fist curled around the tags and Bear laid his head against Nathan's leg, he knew one thing for certain. Love, no matter how fractured, had refused to die. Winter did not forgive for long. The storm that had briefly quieted returned with teeth, sweeping across St. Paul in heavy bands of snow. Nathan knew weather like this killed quickly, and yet he felt an unease beyond ice and wind. Promises attract trials. He had promised James Parker. He had promised himself. Somewhere in his gut, he expected the world to test whether he meant to keep it. It came 2 nights later. The neonatal wing was humming in its midnight lull when alarm shrieked. Power flickered once, then cut entirely. Emergency lights washed the halls in red. Nurses rushed between cribs, voices clipped with urgency. Nathan, who had been dozing in a chair, bolted upright. Bear was already on his feet, growling low, fur bristling. Dr. Laura Whitman burst into the hall. "Generators are failing," she snapped to a nurse. "Get portable warmers. Move the infants now." Ethan's crib was rolled out, tiny body swaddled tight, wires trailing from monitors that now blinked on battery backup. Nathan moved instinctively to help, Bear pacing beside him. Then Sheriff Reed stormed in from the stairwell, gun drawn, eyes sharp. "This isn't an outage," he barked. "Somebody cut power. Security found the locks on the south entrance forced." Nathan's blood chilled colder than the snow outside. They came back for him. Bear barked once, loud and urgent, then lunged toward the corridor that led to the loading dock. Nathan followed without question, Reed at his shoulder. The dog's nose pulled him down the hallway until he skidded to a halt at a side door hanging ajar. Beyond it, snow swirled in, footprints stamped deep and hurried. From the far end of the corridor came a cry, high, thin, terrified. Ethan. Nathan ran. Two figures loomed ahead, faces masked, one cradling the swaddled infant clumsily under an arm. The other raised a flashlight that blinded Nathan for a heartbeat. Bear launched before thought could interfere, slamming into the man holding Ethan. The bundle tumbled into the snow, rolling, but Nathan was already there, catching it against his chest, shielding the baby with his body as he fell to his knees. The second man swung a crowbar. Reed's gun barked, the shot sparking concrete inches from the attacker's feet. "Drop it," Reed roared. Bear snarled, teeth bared, holding the first man pinned by the arm until Nathan pulled the infant clear. The cry in his chest was alive, furious, blessedly strong. Relief washed through him in a rush so fierce it hurt. But danger wasn't done. From the shadows by the loading bay, another shape emerged, a woman, thin, gaunt, her face pale with fever. Her eyes locked on Ethan, wild with desperation. "Give him back," she screamed. "He's mine." Nathan froze, the voice cracked with illness, but the words carried truth. Sophia, the mother whose journal he had read. Sheriff Reed stepped forward cautiously, gun still trained. "Ma'am, you need medical care. He's safe now." Sophia shook her head violently. "You don't understand. Without him, I have nothing." Her knees buckled, the fever dragging her down. She collapsed in the snow, sobbing. For a moment, the world went still. Nathan knelt in the freezing corridor, with Ethan pressed against his chest. Bear standing guard. Reed cuffing the men who had tried to flee. Sophia lay trembling, her arms stretched weakly toward the child she had fought to save until her body betrayed her. Nathan looked down at the infant, then at the broken mother. He saw not malice, but the same desperation Dr. Whitman had spoken of. Sophia hadn't abandoned her son to die. She had gambled the world would be kinder than her failing body. Paramedics arrived with stretchers, taking Sophia into their care. Ethan was returned to the NICU, monitors humming again as generators restored power. The crisis ebbed, but the weight of it did not. Later, in the quiet after chaos, Nathan sat once more by the warmer. Ethan's tiny hand curled around his finger, stronger this time. Bear settled at his feet, chest rising and falling with steady rhythm. Sheriff Reed leaned against the doorway, his face etched with fatigue, but softer than before. "You kept him alive," Reed said quietly. "Whatever doubts I had, they're gone. That baby's breathing because of you and your dog." Nathan didn't answer right away. He stared at Ethan, at the fragile life that had nearly been swallowed by snow and shadows. He had promised James. He had seen Sophia's eyes. The question gnawed at him like hunger. Could he bear the weight of another life when the last one had broken him? Yet when Ethan shifted and sighed against his chest, Nathan felt something he hadn't in years. Not the ache of loss, but the pulse of purpose. Bear lifted his head and nudged Nathan's knee as if to say, "You already chose." Snow still clung to the hospital's window sills, but inside Regent Medical the air had shifted. The chaos of the power outage and attempted abduction had passed, yet the echoes lingered. Nathan carried them like shrapnel. One moment of delay and Ethan might have been lost. Again. Ethan slept now, chest rising in soft, even breaths. Nathan sat in the dim glow of the warmer, shoulders hunched forward, Bear sprawled across his boots. For hours he had replayed the scene, the masked men, the fevered cry of Sophia, the desperate struggle in the snow. He couldn't escape the thought that if he faltered, Ethan's life would slip away just as Lily's had. Dr. Laura Whitman entered quietly, chart in hand. She paused when she saw Nathan, his hand resting protectively on the side of the crib. "He's thriving," she whispered. "Your body heat likely saved him more than once. And today—" She let the words trail, studying him with a gentleness that made his chest ache. "You kept your promise." Nathan shook his head. "I'm not sure I can keep it. I'm no father, not anymore." His voice cracked around the truth. "I couldn't even protect the one I had." Bear's ears twitched. He pressed his head against Nathan's leg with deliberate weight, as though refusing to let him collapse inward. Laura stepped closer. "Lily's death was not yours to stop. But Ethan's life, that's in front of you. He doesn't need a perfect man. He needs a man who won't walk away." Nathan looked down at the infant. Small fingers flexed in sleep, curling as though gripping something invisible. His dog tags glinted against his chest where Ethan's hand had clutched them earlier, the same way Lily once had. Memory blurred into present. His daughter's laugh, this baby's cry, Bear's steady presence bridging both. The decision that had haunted him all week crystallized. He could keep running from ghosts, or he could build something in their shadow. Sheriff Reed entered just then, hat in hand. "Sophia's in critical care," he reported. "Pneumonia advanced. She may not make it through the week." He sighed heavily. "She's asked for one thing, that her son grow up knowing he was loved, and she asked me to tell you, she wants you to keep him." The words hit Nathan like a hammer. He leaned back, breath ragged. Bear stood, tail thumping once, as if affirming the command. "Why me?" Nathan whispered. Reed's gaze was steady. "Because when the world tried to steal that boy twice, you stood in the way. Because when he cried, your dog found him. And because sometimes fate doesn't ask permission, it just hands you the weight and dares you to carry it." Silence held. Then Ethan stirred, a soft whimper breaking the stillness. Nathan lifted him from the crib almost without thinking. The child's warmth seeped into his chest, the tiny body relaxing instantly in his arms. Bear nosed at the blanket, huffing warm breath across Ethan's cheek. The boy blinked once, eyes cloudy but searching, then stilled, his small hand clutching Nathan's shirt as though it had always belonged there. Something inside Nathan broke open, not like a wound, but like a dam releasing water long held. Tears slid hot down his face, dropping onto the baby's blanket. He didn't wipe them away. Laura's voice was soft but sure. "He's chosen you." Nathan pressed his cheek against Ethan's head, whispering through the tears. "Then I choose him. I won't fail this time, not while I breathe." Bear let out a low, approving rumble, curling at their feet like a sentry whose post was eternal. The rescue wasn't of a baby alone. It was of a soldier who had thought his heart was beyond saving. In Ethan's fragile grip, and Bear's steady watch, Nathan found the courage to step out of the grave he had dug beside Lily and live again. Spring softened Minnesota's edges. Snowbanks shrank into rivulets, the Mississippi shook off its ice, and the air carried the damp scent of earth, waking. At Nathan's cabin on the outskirts of St. Paul, life was beginning again in quiet, steady rhythms. Ethan had been released from the hospital weeks earlier. Nathan remembered carrying him through the door for the first time, Bear bounding ahead as if to announce that the house was no longer hollow. Now, every morning began with the same ritual. Bear stretching luxuriously by the crib, Ethan's cries rising in protest, and Nathan lifting the boy into the crook of his arm. The warmth of that tiny body against his chest no longer felt like borrowed grace, but like home returned. Emma Hayes, the nurse whose kindness had threaded itself through Ethan's first fragile nights, had become a frequent presence. She brought meals, advice, and laughter that seeped into corners long starved of it. Her hands, practiced and gentle, guided Nathan through diaper changes and late-night fevers. Over time, she began leaving a sweater draped over a chair, a stack of books by the couch. The cabin no longer looked like a soldier's bunker. It looked like a place where love could live. Nathan still visited Lily's grave, but the visits had changed. He no longer stood there emptied, pleading for answers. He came with Ethan in his arms, Bear sitting faithfully at his heel, and he spoke softly to the headstone about the boy who carried the name of another father, but the future of them all. For the first time, grief and gratitude coexisted without tearing him apart. Years passed as quickly as spring rivers run. Ethan grew sturdy, his laughter echoing through the trees the way Lily's once had. He learned to walk, gripping Bear's fur, the shepherd patient and protective, as though aware of his sacred post. By the time Ethan was 20, taller than Nathan and broad in the shoulders, the boy carried himself with the same steadiness his adoptive father had once carried into battle. On the day his own son was born, he named him James, honoring the man who had given life through sacrifice. Nathan, hair silver now, stood on a snowy hill overlooking the Mississippi with Ethan, Emma, and little James. Bear, older but still proud, leaned against his leg. The three generations stood together in the pale winter light, bound not by blood alone, but by love, promises, and second chances. Nathan breathed in the cold air, feeling it no longer as an enemy, but as proof he was alive. The promise he had made in a dying man's cabin, that Ethan would know he was loved, had been kept. And more than kept, it had multiplied, rippling outward into lives not yet imagined. As the river moved beneath them, carrying winter away into spring, Nathan thought of Lily, of Grace and Sophia, of James Parker, of every ghost that had brought them here. He whispered a truth he finally believed. Love never dies. It just finds new hands to carry it. Bear barked once, the sound clear against the sky, as if to seal the vow. And so the story closed not in sorrow, but in renewal. Proof that even in the coldest snow, warmth can be found, carried forward, and never lost again.